Okay, so we started today with Richard talking about the future reality of AI, how it's going to interact with all of our data, the most sensitive data that we possess, the likes of our messages, our emails, our financial data. And so it's appropriate that we finish with this last panel by coming full circle and talking to two folks who are building at the cutting edge of that very intersection. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to the two panelists to introduce themselves and what they're building, starting with Arthaud.
Great, yeah. So I'm Arthaud. I'm one of the co-founders of Mio. I think we're Fabric's latest investment, so it's great to be here. And so what we're building a tool for AI apps to be able to personalize their outputs. So what we do is we take in user data, we derive preferences, and we serve that to LLMs for them to be able to personalize things, and we do that in a privacy-preserving way. And so we started by building two apps that are live on WorldCoin. We started in January, and we now have a little over 200,000 users.
Hi there, my name's Tom Valentine. I'm the COO at Fyxer. Fyxer is an AI executive assistant business. We've been going for about a year. We're just back from an accelerator in San Francisco at the beginning of this year. And we landed in London on January 1st with $1 million ARR and just went through 10.
Thank you very much. So to kick off, how should we think about AI getting access to very personal data, things like emails? And how do you build for the user experience and build the technological stack to deal with that? Maybe starting with yourself, Tom.
Yeah, so I feel extremely comfortable about AI kind of well moderated by a layer like us getting access to your email data. The big web already has access to that email data. And then the question is, can we gain your trust and add value when we get access to that data? And the exciting thing about an executive assistant business is we believe we can add value without an incredibly complicated workflow that needs to be intermediated multiple times. So the first value we add is filtering all your emails, telling you what % of them need a response, and then drafting a response. And so we get to show we are using that data sensibly, and then we don't actually have to do anything without your consent, right? So you see the draft, you're impressed by it, maybe you send it unaltered, or maybe you edit it, or maybe what we wrote prompts you to think and you write the opposite. Either which way, we add some value. And we don't need to facilitate any kind of weird interactions where it goes off and then comes back in 3 days.
Arthaud?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a balance between privacy and I guess like the UX uplift that you can give. The way we do it is we try and do as much of it locally, and then the rest we do within TEs, so that what leaks to the model is only what is extremely relevant for that specific prompt. So in the case of emails, we're not going to share your entire inbox to the model. What we're going to do is we're going to maybe take the 10 relevant emails for this specific prompt and leak that. And then the objective long term is for the inference to happen either locally or within a TE as well, so that nothing leaks.
And so maybe kind of starting with you, Tom. So you mentioned that the user is seeing everything that the model is proposing that it sends. So there's that element of user control before it gets sent out. But we've spoken, and as we look to the future, we see agents acting autonomously on users' behalf. What do you think is required, both technologically and in terms of user behavior and experience, to get to a stage where we're comfortable with, say, the model sending the email directly without user input?
Yeah, and we're already starting to see requests. Again, I'll kind of tend to talk about email a lot because I suspect we all still use it. But we're already starting to see requests that we weren't seeing 6 months ago for, say, a sales professional saying, hey, I love these drafts you write in response to a lead. Can you just send them out for me? And when we talk to customers and probe why that is, there's an extent to which the technology is already there, right? So, use your metaphor of choice, but, quite often writes emails better than we would write. And then the thing that I think is extremely important is the cost of a fail, right? So if you're responding to a B2B lead and the email isn't perfect, How much does that cost you? You can do the calculus about, well, if I get to send 100 emails I wouldn't otherwise send, if one or two of them were suboptimal, that's probably okay, right? And so that seesaw you can see extending into almost any one-and-done task. The area where it gets exponential is when it's multiple one-and-done tasks linked together, and the value is not having to jump into the individual checkpoints. And I think when we heard the finance people talking, I think that's the area where there's a bigger lift, isn't there?
And to what extent, Arthaud mentioned, how using a lot of kind of local-based kind of LLMs. To what extent, I guess, first to Tom and then to Arthaud, do you think about using kind of local LLMs or more privacy-preserving type LLMs?
Yeah, so we try and do the majority of the sensitive processing outside of the big foundational models, and then use the bigger and frankly more expensive models for the most aggressive computational lift that we have to do. So honestly, we look at the capabilities of the models and we look at the cost of them, and then we try and keep everything as close to us as we can. But again, we're relatively relaxed about taking advantage of the best technology we can find out there.
Yeah, I think quite aligned with that. We internally talk a lot about pragmatic privacy, where you kind of need to earn the right to build something private. So you need to get kind of users first, and then kind of do that. So I don't want to say privacy is an afterthought, but I do want to say that if you build the most private system but have no users, it's not useful at all.
And I guess following up, where for you, there is clearly a performance degradation when you use either kind of locally kind of run models, or whether you use kind of privacy-preserving technologies like TEEs. Where for you, in terms of building an app for users, does that line exist in terms of your onus on protecting a user's data versus their desires for a slick and easy-to-use product?
The way we've landed so far is with TEs, we've seen a 20 to 30% increase in costs, and so far we've bitten the bullet there, and we've just accepted that. I think there's going to be a question kind of moving forward, what makes the most sense. I think so the way we balance it is embeddings, data, all of that local, and then inference. I think we're happy with using either cutting edge open source or some more closed source models.
And then, so talking about kind of open versus closed, there's been a lot of debate around the relative values of open models, closed models. Perhaps unexpectedly, most of the highest quality open models come out of China. How do you think about building on top of open models versus closed models? And do you think they both have relevant places, or do you think ultimately the stack will coalesce around one of those two different approaches?
I think it'll be a mix of both. What I found interesting is Google now does some open source stuff. OpenAI is committed to doing some open source stuff. Mistral has started doing some closed source stuff. So we're kind of seeing somewhat of a merger. I mean, both Tom and I are basically benefiting a lot, I think, from just the pace at which things are improving. So it seems like we've got to kind of make new choices every couple of months, and I think that's actually great for us.
So maybe kind of changing gears slightly, Ilya in his earlier panel alluded to kind of the death of apps. And one of the things that I think has been very interesting is as chatbots have grown in usage, user behavior has to adapt with it. To what extent, as someone who's been in the market now for a year building this, to what extent have you seen user behavior shift as they become more comfortable with these tools and their demands around what they expect from the products that use them?
Yeah, so I think our assessment at Fyxer is the thing we've seen over the course of the year is people outside of San Francisco and Old Street actually starting to use these tools daily, right? And there are cases where people find their toothpaste use in a chat experience. And then there are cases where you add the incredible value that these tools can add through a different modality, right? And I think more and more the app layer is going to have to bend to pre-existing workflows, to people that don't view it as a badge of pride that they've learned a new set of keyboard commands, but just realize they're able to do their work more efficiently when they're taking advantage of Gen AI, right? And so I guess my sense is I see the app layer growing, perhaps with the exception of areas where you can see it very easily being something you just choose to type into one of the open prompts.
Yeah, I think overall, very, very aligned with that.
And so one of the kind of the big high-level questions within the space is kind of, who ultimately wins, right? Is it models? Is it the foundational model providers? Is it the applications? Somewhere in between. And we've seen some interesting kind of headlines over the past few months of kind of foundational model companies moving up the stack, with OpenAI buying Windsurf, and also of kind of application companies looking to move down the stack, with people like Cursor looking to train their own models. As two folks who've building at the application layer, how do you think about that in the kind of the short term and in the kind of in the long term? Do you think it's necessary for applications to build their own models, or actually do you reject that framing and you think that actually there's enough value that can be created just by building the application layer on top of these models, and they'll become commoditized? So that's a better way to go.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is like the progress is happening the fastest at the model layer, but it seems like value accrual is happening either under them, so at the chip level, or at the app level. And so I think it's, so that's point number one. I think point number two for me is it seems like on the algorithmic side of progress, a lot of it is happening in like fine-tuning and post-training. And so apps have somewhat of an advantage there because they have the data to do so. And so I think that's partly what's motivating some of these model companies to kind of like move up the stack. And I think then I'm talking my book here, obviously, but we think that like the real edge here is memory, and so and we don't think that should live at like the model layer, and so we are doing all that's possible for that to be separate. So for preferences and memory to be at a different layer than the model itself.
And look, it was an exciting space and time to work in a year ago. It's only getting more exciting. Like basically a year ago, the thing that was totally off the table was that we might build our own model. Like it's now not inconceivable that we might over the course of the next 12 months. So the icebox is getting more and more full. But frankly, in a world where we're finally getting wide consumer adoption of these tools, there's quite a lot of stuff which you can roll out in a day which moves the metrics. So I don't see it happening immediately, but it's extremely cool that you don't need to raise billions to do it anymore.
And so thinking about the kind of as you mentioned, the pace of change within the space, and the kind of the level of innovation that's happening, in terms of like at the model layer, it's kind of a shift from maybe kind of purely pre-trained basic models to kind of reasoning models and test time compute. How do you think about building an application, and what kind of features do you put the onus on yourself to focus on versus those that are likely to come from lower down the stack?
So look, it's just boring product work, I'm afraid, right? So we've got a clear view of our ICP. They're a customer-facing professional services person that probably wouldn't 5 years ago have been able to afford an executive assistant. They live in email, they live in meetings, and slowly we're chipping away at their busy work. And then almost everything we come across is solvable with a couple of smart engineers in a couple of weeks, and is considerably better than Gemini and Copilot. And we just keep kind of smashing down that wall.
Yeah, I think quite aligned as well. I think speed is the main differentiation here, and so it's maybe where like startups have somewhat of an advantage in that like we can just move a lot faster and make decisions a lot faster than anyone else. I also think that time to market is a lot shorter, and so we're able to like get feedback from users and just ship like I think from shipping like weekly to daily, and I think that's really exciting for us.
And so maybe kind of, thinking about the memory point, people have talked about maybe that is kind of the lock-in that these major companies are thinking about, and OpenAI obviously bringing out these features around memory. How do you kind of think as an independent startup of of getting into that mix as a credibly neutral player to kind of to branch across all these different models?
Yeah, the way we see it is very similar to Shopify, where like we're trying to arm the rebels. The internet is already like super centralized. I think 50% of web searches go to the top 20 websites, and we think that if it's going to be, if in a couple of years' time it's going to be AIs making most decisions on our behalf, it's quite scary if they have all the data. So yeah, we see ourselves like arming the rebels, and we see it as like an urgent need. And I guess that how we think of it is not dissimilar to Stripe, where everyone before used to build their own kind of like payments infrastructure. And we think that by being a team of whatever 10 by end of year, we'll be able to build a better product than each of these teams would do individually.
And so one final question, I guess going back to the question that started the first panel, where do you see that, this space moves so fast and so much has changed in just the last 12 months, but where do you see this space in 10 years, and how do you kind of think about building towards that goal?
Gosh, I find myself getting distracted when my mind settles there, right? Like, I'm pretty certain the professional experience will be unrecognizable. I don't really know how, and I've got targets for next month. And so we're like, as long as we're moving approximately in the right direction, I'm comfortable. And I'm afraid I don't have anything cleverer than that to say.
Yeah, I think same here. I think my co-founder and I aligned on the fact that what mattered to us was bringing self-sovereignty and interoperability to user data, and we would do kind of whatever it took to get us there. And so, yeah, I think very determined on like, this is where we're going and this is what we care about, but then super flexible on like short term, because we get new data every day and we need to adapt to that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good place to leave it. So yeah, thank you.